Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kaf Aleph, a super interesting daf having a lot to do with chinuch, education. So anyone who's an educator, this is the daf for you, or cares about education. Well, it's probably everybody here. And a few brief announcements. So first of all, specifically on the topic of education, on second thought this week of Rabbanit Clamor, which should hopefully go up later today, it's all about this topic and about the responsibility of the community to invest in education. I also forgot to mention the last two shiurim that went up. One was Alana Stein-Haynes on the argument of Tornis Rufus and Rabbi Akiva, really a more theological about what does God want from us. Fascinating shiur. And Rabbi Yehoshua from last week about neighbors and the shechina, and the connection, and really as a good introduction to the Masechet. So if you haven't listened to them on the Beyond the Daf materials, highly recommend it. Okay, I'll remind everybody, because it's relatively new, that you can also listen to them on podcast, which is quite convenient. So you can find it on Beyond the Daf Hadran podcast. There's a whole channel, and then you can kind of subscribe and get the notifications when the shiurim go up. Okay, and a reminder also, I mentioned yesterday, I'll be speaking in Chicago on the 31st. So if anybody is in Chicago, wants to come to Chicago, or has relatives or friends there, so spread the word. You can let us know and we'll send you the flyer. With that, we will get started with our interesting daf. So starting at the bottom of Kaf Amabet, we had a Mishna. I'm going to reread the Mishna, and we're going to still have some questions about this Mishna once we finish today's shiur, which is, the Mishna starts off and says, so if I have a store in the courtyard and it's bothering you, the noise of the people going in and out, it's interesting. The Mishna says, I can't sleep from the noise. It's interesting. Why are you sleeping? First of all, people sleep at night, not during the day, and people don't work at night. There's no people coming into my store at night, certainly in those days. Maybe nowadays, yes, but in those days, not. Either people were sleeping in the afternoon, which would then mean, in hours when people aren't sleeping. And I know I have issues with my neighbor. They would say 2 to 4, right? And it's kind of an unwritten law in Israel, this 2 to 4 thing, quiet hours. But I think it's a little bit strange, specifically because the noise could bother you even when you're not trying to sleep. So, and again, if you're talking about sleeping, that's only certain hours of the day. But it seems to be obviously referring anyway to any time of day, and that you can basically prevent your friend from having your neighbor who lives in the same courtyard as you from having a store in their property. But what can't you stop them from doing? Osek kelim, they can create kelim, right? Make vessels, even though that makes noise. Or yotzei mocher b'shuk. It seems to be saying, as long as you don't turn your place into a store, a studio, yes, not a store. We don't want other people coming in, right? My own noise I can make, I'm allowed to make, but the noise of other people coming in, okay, now is it noise? The Mishna seems to say it's noise. Some people claim, and it seems like the pshat here, actually, the simple reading is that it's privacy, which relates again to the beginning of the Masechet, of all the hezek riyah, and you want privacy. First of all, where do we see this issue that courtyards are more private areas? We saw when we talked about kisoy rosh, covering your hair, women covering their hair, and there were different laws in the courtyard and in the shuk, because the shuk is very public. The chatzir is very private. It's just you and whatever neighbors live right next to you, and there's different rules. So it's the same concept here, that the chatzir is supposed to be a private space, and you're not supposed to have all sorts of people traipsing in. And then it makes a lot of sense if we're talking about the difference between me working in my own house making noise versus me bringing lots of people into the courtyard. And right, so we said you can do that as long as you sell them in the shuk. Basically, it's like we talked about yesterday. This area is zoned not for stores, but for private use. And private use can include making kelim. And then it mentioned these three things: from the hammer, or some sort of implement making a lot of noise, from the millstone, right? People also would use their millstone, right, for all sorts of things. And, in other words, when I mean private and public use. Now here also, I don't think they mean a millstone that you could be grinding all the grains for everybody else, because that's going to bother your neighbors. And lo mikol hatinokot, and not from the noise of children. Now this children noise wasn't so clear what we mean. Now it could be my kids making noise, screaming, right? And the neighbors complaining that my kids are screaming. They can't stop my kids from screaming. But in the Tosefta, it actually says what the Gemara is going to say, which is we're talking about children studying. And what we're going to see is that according to Rava, and that's really based on the Tosefta, which is we're talking about you can't stop me, even though I can't have a store, I can have a school. That's very interesting because a school, first of all, is super loud. You have kids screaming all day. We have my kids' elementary school is in the middle of a residential area, and there's always issues with the neighbors. And there's a lot of neighbors all around, and it's a challenge because the kids make noise in the middle of the day. They're out of recess. It's super loud, and parents come and other people. Right? There's always teachers come. There's a lot of people that come now. Obviously, our schools nowadays are bigger than their schools were in those days, but still, you have the kids who are coming. You have the parents picking up. It creates a lot, and yet you can't complain if somebody does that. So now we have our Gemara. So again, there's a lot that's not really clear here. Is it selling versus, individual use? Is it the privacy issue? Is it the noise issue? But it seems like it's the noise because that's what they're saying, but it's not clear it's the noise. It seems more likely it's the privacy. So anyway, now the Gemara starts off and says, Mishna Resho, Mishna Seifa, because in the end, that's noise. Why is this noise a problem and this noise not a problem? Abaye has an interesting interpretation, which Rava is going to reject, but he says the second part of the Mishnah is not really talking about the same situation as the first part, and it doesn't have to do with business versus personal or private. No, he says very simply, and perhaps they're really talking about the Kolatino coat, because if you assume the Kolatino coat is school, then it's the same idea of having people come in and out. And perhaps that's really the issue they're grappling with, because that's really the issue they're going to answer. Certainly the answer Rava is going to say is really only going to relate to that and not to the other two items. But he says, we're talking about you can't stop someone from a nearby courtyard. Remember, let's say we have 2 or 3 houses opening up into a courtyard, 2 or 3 or 4 courtyards opening up into an alley. So if I'm going to stop the person in the next door courtyard and I say, I don't let you, because remember, this is all, it doesn't mean I can't do it. It means my neighbor can stop me if it bothers them. Let's say the person living in my courtyard, it doesn't bother them, but the person living in the next door courtyard, it bothers them. Well, they can't complain. Okay? If it's not in their face, meaning in their courtyard, they have no rights to complain. That's what Abaye says, to which Amarle Rava, right? And basically what Abaye is saying is when it says, you can't stop anyone for the Kol HaPatish, Kol HaRechaim, Kol HaTinokot, that's talking about someone from another courtyard. It definitely is not what the Mishnah said, and that's what Rava is going to say. Then it should have said, it's permitted in a different courtyard. It's a bit of a weird language he's saying, but what he's really saying is, it's not permitted, it's just you can't complain if it's the person living in the courtyard next to you. You have no rights to complain. You can't stop someone living in the nearby courtyard from having anything really, even a store, it sounds like. But Rava said that's not what it says. If it had meant that it would have said it, and therefore Rava rejects Abaye. And here comes Rava, and from here we're going to get on a huge tangent into the issue of chinuch of our children. Ela amar Rava, seifa atan litinokot shel beit Rabban. Well, the seifa is talking about creating a school for children. Okay? That you're allowed to do. The kol hatinokot is allowed because it's a school for children. It's an exception to the rule. Why? Mitakana Yehoshua ben Gamla ve'elach. It's from the Takana of Yehoshua ben Gamla. He was living the end of the Second Temple period. He instituted a Takana that we have to create schools. And now we're going to learn the history of that. But there's another person, if you listen to Rabbanit Climber, that her Shiur on second thought, she talks about that. They also, she quotes a source that Shimon ben Shatach was also known to have done this. This is a little earlier than Yehoshua ben Gamla, but see what's the difference between what he instituted and he instituted. Anyway, we're going to talk about Yehoshua ben Gamla today. To Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Biram Zachor Oto Ish L'Tov. This person was known to have done a great thing. Yehoshua ben Gamla Shmo, this person that we're talking about is Yehoshua ben Gamla. She'ilmalehu nishtakach Torah Yisrael. The Torah would have been forgotten were it not for him. This is very interesting because it's around the same time where they decided, a little later, but they decided to write down the Mishna. Right? It's all at the end of the Second Temple period where they realized that the Torah is going to be forgotten. And for perhaps this is a similar reason or a different reason, right? The Torah was passed down orally from father to son. And the challenge is, right, how to keep that going without there being mistakes and all that. And here we're going to mention not just it's a problem that people are going to pass things down and maybe get it wrong, Okay, and therefore we have to sit down and write it, even though we really weren't supposed to write down the oral Torah. But here, there's a different issue, which is if it's all passed down from father to son, now where do we get that it's all passed down from father to son? All the psukim that talk about it, we say it in Shema every day, you should teach your son. You should teach your sons, right? It's all about father to son teaching. Never mentions teachers in the Torah. So Misha Yesh Lo Av, right? We take it for granted that we have teachers. So Misha Yesh Lo Av melamdo Torah. Misha Ein Lo Av lo haya lamed Torah. So there's a big problem. If you have a father, so we'll teach you Torah. If you don't have a father, then you're not going to have a way to learn. And that's why the Torah is going to be forgotten. Now, were there so many orphans? First of all, possibly. But I think the word Misha Ein Lo Av, and it's not just me who says this, commentaries say it as well, Misha Ein Lo Av is a father who can't teach his son, okay, for all sorts of reasons. Either the father himself doesn't know Torah, or if the father's not a good teacher, right? How many people are capable of homeschooling their children? Okay, raise of hands, right? How many people? Not too many, right? Always amazed at those people who can do it. But it's very hard to teach your children, right? As much as we try, the children definitely defy their parents much more so than their teachers, or many anyway. And it's not so easy. And not everyone's cut out for teaching, right? It's a hard challenge to basically, there's going to be a lot of cases where a parent can't teach a child because the parent's not capable of teaching. The parent's just not a good teacher, not patient enough. The kid doesn't want to learn from the parent. All sorts of reasons why it wouldn't work. So we said, right, why did we think it's all the father? Well, my drush, v'limadatem otam. And how did they translate that? Or they darshaned it. V'limadatem atem. Otam is teach your sons. But what they mean is not only teach your sons, but atem, you're the ones responsible, the father. Hitkinu, so came Yehoshua ben Gamla and said, okay, I see this is the problem. Even though that's really the halacha, we have to change it. So Hitkinu Shiur Moshivim Melamdei Tinokot Yerushalayim. So the first stage was, let's have teachers in Jerusalem. And everyone will travel to Jerusalem. Whoever doesn't have a father or doesn't have a father who can teach them will travel to Jerusalem. My drush, why Jerusalem? How'd they get to that? Because from Zion, the Torah will come, right? Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. So the words of Torah will come out of Jerusalem. So if already we're going to change it, let's change it in a way that fits in with that pasuk. But still was a problem because not everyone could come to Jerusalem. Adayin, Misha Yesh Lo Av Hayama Lo Melamdo. So if you had a father, the father could bring you there. Misha Ein Lo Av Lo Haya Olev Lamed. But kids can't travel on their own. It was dangerous to travel so far to Jerusalem. So if you didn't have a father who could take you, again, it doesn't mean you don't have a father. It just means your father's not capable of taking you. He's got a job. He's got, right, he can't leave. The mother obviously was busy at home with the other children. She couldn't bring the son. But maybe the father could, but not everybody's father had the luxury of bringing their kid to Jerusalem. So next stage of the takana, Itkinu Shiur Moshivim B'chol Pelech V'Pelech. So they decided we're going to go regional. Okay, Rashi says Pelech V'Pelech, and it's clear from the continuation of the sugya, means a Pelech includes a bunch of midinot, a bunch of states. Okay, so whatever midinot are, right? Midinot, it comes up a lot. Medina, the Medina, right? Medina, in the sugyas of Gitim, we talked about it, from one state to another state. So we have a Pelech as an area that includes a lot of different states, but at least it's not as far as Jerusalem, right? We have in different regions. Umachnisin oto keben 16 keben 17. And then they would have the kids go to school when they were 16 or 17. Why 16 or 17? Well, still to get to the nearby region, we're talking about still a far distance, the kids had to be old enough to travel on their own. It wouldn't be dangerous. So that's about 16 or 17. What's the problem? Hard for us to imagine, right? We start school at a very young age. But if you start going to school at the age of 16 or 17, it's very hard to get a kid at age 16, 17 to start studying. So, anyone whose rabbi would get angry with him because he wasn't learning well, he would just kick the rabbi or, set aside this whole issue and leave. And basically you ended up with not a very big school and not a very big population because not every kid can handle starting school at age 16 or 17, right? It's an age when people more want to go out and do other things, and it wasn't really so successful. Ad Sheba Yehoshua ben Gamla. Now here's where Yehoshua ben Gamla comes in. So until there, right, they kept trying. Okay, it's unclear if he started the whole thing. Okay, it seems like he started the whole thing, did stage 1, stage 2, and then there needed to be a stage 3. He came, and this is what we've been looking for. By the way, this is straight out of the Megillat Esther, right? He put it in every state and in every city. And then, because it was still local, people would start at a young age of 6 or 7, which is the same age we start now, and at least, formal education, if you call first grade, more formal rather than kindergarten. So kids would start at age 6 or 7, depending on their readiness to go. Right nowadays, we send them no matter what. Some kids are more ready for first grade, some kids are less ready, but there they would do it by age and whether they were ready. And basically, Amr le Rav Shmuel bar Shila, ad shitlo tekabel, until 6, don't accept them. Mikam ve'elach kabel va'as ve'le. But once you accept them at age 6, take them like an ox, okay? Treat them like an ox. So many different interpretations what this means, but most people think this means force them to learn, okay? In other words, be tough with them, like an ox gets a yoke put on them, be serious and make it be very strict so that the kids understand there's a framework and you have to keep to that framework and there's no choice here, okay? And that's the idea of Yehoshua ben Gamla. And then from there, we go back to our sugya, which is once he said you have to have in all different areas, then we're not going to prevent people who want to start a school in their courtyard from starting a school. So if they start a school, you can't stop them, okay? No zoning laws, no nothing. They want to start a school, they're allowed to because of the importance of teaching children. Now we're going to have all sorts of other things. Now, already Rav started talking about how be strong and disciplined with them. But also, Amar le Rav Shmuel bar Shila, ki machet li'yinuk, if you're going to hit a child, okay, this is already, nowadays this would never happen, right? We've gone away with this whole philosophy of how to treat children, but you'll see it's toned down here. Lotim chayela ba'arketa de misana, only use a strap of a sandal, which apparently was not so strong, okay, meaning go light on them. De kare, if they read and that gets them in line, great. De lo kare, now what would you expect them to say, right? If hitting them lightly is not going to work, expect them maybe to say hit them harder or kick him out of school or something. But no, he says something very surprising. And again, I say surprising for the times. It seems very forward thinking. Lehavet savta lechavre. Just put him with his friends, okay? Because when he's with his friends, I'm using the masculine here because the girls didn't go to school. Put him with his friends because his friends are going to be, positive peer pressure. Hopefully, they will encourage him to study. In other words, if you as the teacher can't do it, at least use peer pressure to your advantage. That's one way of interpreting it. There's a lot of statements here that can be interpreted in different ways. Another interpretation is, well, if you kick him out of school, which would be the other alternative, and not leave him with his friends, it's the opposite, then what will happen? Well, this is something I always wondered as a child. I never understood the concept of suspending someone. Basically, if you get suspended, you're misbehaving because you don't really want to be in school. And then what do you get? You get a prize. You don't have to be in school. Never really understood it. And that's what he's basically saying. If you kick him out of school, first of all, it's what he wants. And second of all the other students will see, oh, now he doesn't go to school. Great. We'll do the same and we won't have to go to school. So it's not really a good method. And therefore, do the other method of put him with his friends. And hopefully that will get him into shape. Anyway, it's an interesting interpretation. Now we're going to have 3 difficulties with Rava. What did Rava say? And Rava is really a big, he appears a lot in today's daf. And we're going to, in fact, Tosfot later connects something that he says that sort of doesn't really work with something earlier he said. So we're going to read that Tosfot because it's very interesting. Let's talk about Rava. Rava right now said, if I decide to make a school in my house, okay, I mentioned yesterday about having the Daf Yomi class in my street. I actually have a very small street, and I'll bring it up later because it's one of these streets. It's in a U shape, and basically I'm in the middle, so it creates traffic jams and all that. So it really was a bit of an annoyance to my neighbors to have people coming in every morning. Some people walked and didn't park, bring cars, but it's a little bit of an annoying street, and parking's an issue and all that. And the guy across the street from me is sells glasses, and there's 2 people who sell glasses on the street. There's a lot of businesses that go on our street, which sometimes I wonder, why is my street so crowded? It has one way in and one way out, and it doesn't go lead to any other street. But because there's so many businesses on the street, it actually creates a lot of traffic. And these are the issues that we're really grappling with, of creating traffic in the street and issues and traffic jams. And anyway, it's also an annoying street because it's U-shaped and it's two ways. So you always get stuck with other cars. It's an annoyance. So anyway, going back to this topic of Rava, who says you can have a school in your house. Well, and the other people can't stop you from doing it, the people in the same courtyard. We're going to bring three contradictions from Tanaitic sources. Meitive. Here it says it straight out against what he said. If one of the people in the courtyard wants to become a doctor, a bloodletter, a weaver, or someone who teaches students, right, a teacher, the people in the courtyard can stop the person from doing it, okay? They can prevent you. So here it says explicitly, right? These are all things that bring traffic to the area. They can stop you, to which the Gemara answers, this is not a difficulty. This is if you're teaching Gentile children. That you're not allowed to do. We're talking here about teaching Torah. Okay, Tashma, second source. Two people are living in a courtyard. It's really the same idea. And one of them decides, I want to become a doctor. Your friend can stop you from doing it. Again, we could just explain this in the exact same way, talking about teaching Gentiles. Tashma, third source. Here's a little bit of a different issue, but the same concept. If I have a house in a courtyard that's shared by a few people, or two people even, I can't rent it out. Forget about, right? It's not me wanting to become a doctor, but I can't rent it out to someone knowing that they want to be, right? That they are a doctor. Lola Rofei, Lola Uman, Lola Gardi, Lola Sofer Yehudi, Lola Sofer Aramai. And here it's going to be difficult to say Jew, Gentile, because it lists here, in addition to the doctor, the bloodletter, the weaver, it also says a Sofer Yehudi, which we assume means a teacher of Jews, and a Sofer Aramai, a teacher of Gentiles. So you can't say the teacher of Jews is teaching Gentiles. So so we say, we're talking about the sofer of the city. Now, sofer usually means scribe. There's multiple interpretations given to what is a sofer mata. Is it the scribe of the town? And then the problem is that, right, and then it has nothing to do with teacher. It's a scribe. People come to them for documents all the time, and that brings a lot of traffic. That seems to be the simple interpretation. Rashi actually says we're talking about someone who teaches the teachers of the city. And it has to do with teaching. It's like what they call in Hebrew the mefakach, right? The supervisor. Okay, the one who's teaching teachers. Now, why is that worse? Well, either it's just it's going to bring traffic and it's not for teaching, although it really is for teaching. Rashi seems to say that you're basically going to bring other teachers and they're going to bring their students, and you're basically going to teach them how to teach their students, and that's going to bring a huge amount of traffic because you have teachers and the teacher students, and if you're the guy in the city, well then, it's going to bring a lot of people, and that's too much. That's a possible way of understanding it. If you remember, we had the Sofer Mata in the Sugi Bava Metzia, and there was a debate, did you mean the Sapar Mata? The Sapar Mata is the hair cutter, and that's a whole different issue entirely. Didn't see anyone who uses it here, but they did use it in this other sugya, which we're actually going to quote today. Anyway, we've resolved it in some way by saying it's not really a teacher. It's, either the teacher of teachers, or it's a scribe, or something else. I'm a Rava. Rava continuing, okay? I told you he has a lot to say today. Mitakana Yoshua ben Gamla ba'elach, lo mamtina yinuka mimata lamata. We don't bring children, once he made this takana, we no longer, we don't do busing, right? Busing is always, we're taking children from other areas, busing them into these areas. We don't bring children from city to city because in those days, there weren't buses and it was dangerous. Okay, the roads were dangerous. So we don't risk people's lives basically to get them from city to city. You do it within the same city, which sounds like also it means if I'm a teacher in my city, I can say I'm not accepting students from other cities. Aval, right? This is the whole issue with busing, right? Not all schools want to take kids from other communities. Anyway, that's all a separate issue. Which means, but we can accept students from a different area in the city. Okay, Beknishta is a we know it as a beit knesset, like a shul. It's also a gathering place. That's what lichnos is, to gather. What it means is if there's one people learning in this area and people learning in that, and they're both in the same city, even though it's not exactly parallel, you would have thought it would say same city, different cities, right? It uses the term from shul to shul or beit knesset to beit knesset, but it basically means if it's within the same city, then you can move the children from one to the other. You can, children can insist, I want to go there or not there. But if there's a river in the middle, then no, because again, it's dangerous to cross the river. But and if there's a big wide bridge that's easy to go over and not dangerous, then fine. Gamla, but if it's a small bridge, lo mamtina, then we don't allow it. Rava, another thing Rava says. Here's a good lesson, certainly for schools in Israel could use to learn from this, the educational system. What's the number of children in a classroom? So they say the number of children in a classroom, maximum 25 with one teacher. There's 50, we get two teachers. And if there's 40, so we get a main teacher, and then we have a helper that helps the teacher. It's unclear what's between 25 and 40, right? Because it says one teacher, 25. At 40, we get a helper. Unclear, do you get a helper also under 40 or not? Not so clear. And Masayan Le is the city has to help pay for this. Okay, this is a big thing, saying the responsibility of paying for the school system is on the city. The city has to ensure that the city has teachers for the students. Ba'amarava, hi mikre yenuke degaris, vika achrine degaris tfemine. Okay, big question always for a principal. You have a teacher, and then someone comes along who's a better teacher. Do you fire the first teacher? Lo masakinale. You can't fire the first teacher and bring in the second teacher. Because it will cause the teacher to be negligent. Now, which teacher will cause to be negligent, and what does this mean? Many different interpretations. Some people say if you bring in the new teacher who's a better teacher, they'll become arrogant and then they won't teach well anymore, because they'll say, oh, look, they clearly think I'm an amazing teacher, and then they just won't be so careful about what they do. Okay, that's seems like a reasonable interpretation. Some people think if you kick out the first teacher, well, then they'll stop learning and teaching, and then they'll become a terrible teacher because their confidence is destroyed, and it'll be hard for them to teach after that. Bunch of different interpretations what this means, but it's very interesting to think, right? Don't fire a bad teacher and hire a better teacher, or teacher that's decent and hire a better teacher. It's going to create it's going to create poor standards. What do you mean? Bring in the new teacher instead. It'll make everybody better, because kinat sofrim tarbeh chokhmah. Now here, who will it make better? So there's different interpretations. If you use them all together, then it'll make everyone better. It'll make the first teacher be better because they'll realize that you didn't think their standard was high enough, and they'll raise their standard in order to get a job. It will make the other teacher better because they'll see you fired someone, and they'll say, well, if I don't do a good job, they'll fire me too. And then it'll make me, the second teacher, a better teacher. So this is a big important statement about kinat sofrim tarbeh chokhmah, that it's always good to have more competition in this area. We're going to get to competition also further on, so we can come back and remember this. But Amarav, another fascinating question. Hani tre mikre dardike. You have two teachers. Chad garis velo diek, chad daik velo garis. One is very knowledgeable, but they're not careful with correcting the mistakes of the children or making sure the children get it right. Meaning they're not right. They don't have as much patience probably, and they're not as much in touch with what's going on with the students. The other one is very good with getting the students to get it right, but they're not garis. They don't know as much. They're not as knowledgeable. So what do you go with? Well, we're better with the one who knows his stuff and is just not careful, is precise with the students, because even if the kids make mistakes, eventually they work themselves out. Now, I want you to remember that Rava says this because it's going to contradict something else it's going to say later. That Rava thinks even if you teach them something and they get it wrong, they'll figure it out eventually. Rav Dimi min harde amar mutvina de diek velo garis. Shabeshta kevan de al. I mentioned this in class before. My mother-in-law used to teach students for their bat mitzvah, and she always said, don't study until you get it right, because once you get it wrong, you're going to just keep learning it wrong and wrong and wrong. So This is what we have here. A mistake, once it goes in and it sticks. Okay, we're going to have a story about this. So, and I see you're saying, Caroline, that Rav Dimi is right, and the Gemara is going to also say that Rav Dimi is right. Dichtiv. How do we know this? Well, it says, Ki sheshet chadashim yashav sham Yoav b'chol Yisrael ad echrit kol zachar be'edom. So he sat there for 6 months until he destroyed all the males in Edom. When he got before David, Amarle, David said to him, my time avadet hachi. Why didn't you kill the nikevot, the women? You only killed the males. Why not the women, the females? Amarle, dichtiv, timche et, you know this pasuk, right? Where does it say? Timche et zecher Amalek, right? Which is wipe out the memory of Amalek. But how did he read the pasuk? Timche et zechar, or zachar, depends, whatever, either which way it means the males of Amalek. He had the vowels wrong. Okay, why do you have the vowels wrong? Because that's the way he learned it in elementary school. Okay, wipe out the males of Amalek instead of the memory of Amalek. So you see how just the vowels can make this huge error. I think what they're trying to say is how detrimental, right, a mistake that a teacher makes could be later in life. Amarle, and how once you learn it one way, you don't remember it any other way. Amarle, so David says to him, Vahanan zechel kuridan. We read it as memory, zechel, not zechal, not the males of. Amarle, anan zechar akriyim. What do you mean? They taught me in school. Zechar, the males. Azal, so what does Yoav do? Azal shayle l'Rabbi. Now remember, Yoav is the head of the army, okay? So he goes back to his rabbi, okay, his teacher, you know, first grade, second grade, I don't know what. He goes, he finds him. Right? It's a great story. I mean, whether it happened or not, I'm sure not, but it's a good story. They're trying to highlight a point. Amarle he'acha kritans. He said, how did you teach us this pasuk, right? He wanted to check, right? Did I really, you know, did I mess up? Did the teacher mess up? Amarle zecher. He says zecher. Well, what's the problem? Shakal safsira lemiktale. So he took up a sword and wanted to kill his teacher. Now, why do you want to kill him? Now, why did the teacher say zecher? Did the teacher really teach zecher, or did he teach zachar? And the teacher just realized his mistake and said it right now. That's one possibility, and that's why Yoav wanted to kill him, because he was lying to him. Or perhaps it's more what we spoke about before. He was garis velodie. He knew his stuff, the teacher, but he didn't ensure that all his students knew it correctly. And he didn't catch the fact that Yoav had learned the pasuk incorrectly. Right? It's nice to just stand up there and do frontal teaching, but if you don't hear your students and get feedback from them about how they're doing, then what kind of a job have you done? So either which way, he wasn't a good teacher. Either he had it wrong from the beginning and is now lying, or he had it right from the beginning, but didn't know how to teach properly and didn't know how to ensure that his students got it right. And look what happened. So Yoav wants to kill him because he's a sar tzava. That's what he does when someone doesn't do the right. He's killed a lot of people. Amarle amai. Teacher said, why? Amarle, you know, why do I deserve death for this? Amarle dichtiv. Now, Yoav obviously learned something in school. He pulls out a pasuk from Yirmiyahu and he says, Arur osem alechet Hashem rimiyah. Cursed is the one who does the work of God, turns it into trickery, you know, tricks people. You tricked me into believing it was zachar and not zecher. Amarle. So the teacher quotes back to him the end of that pasuk and says, or no, sorry, not yet the end of the pasuk. Yoav's going to quote the end of that pasuk. Teacher says, well, you've already cursed me, so why don't you just leave it as a curse? You don't have to kill me, right? I'm already cursed because of what I did. Amarle, so Yoav says to him, Ktiv, but the end of that pasuk says, Va'aror moneach harbo midam. Cursed is the one who doesn't use their sword to kill when they're supposed to. And since you should be cursed because, right, the beginning is you should be cursed because you tricked me, I will be cursed if I don't kill you. Well, the story ends in two possible endings. The story of Edwin Drood, right? End it the way you'd like. Ikeda amre katle, ikeda amre lo katle. Some people said he killed him, and some people said he didn't kill him. Okay, fascinating story. Message of the story is, number one, you should teach things correctly, and not only teach them correctly, but make sure your students get it right, because look at where your mistakes can go, because and there proves Rav Dimi, mistakes, shabeshta, kevan de al. Once they go in, they stay in, and they're very hard to fix. Now, remember that Rava said a few minutes ago, but just before this sugya, Rava said if you make a mistake in teaching someone, it's not a big deal because eventually they'll get it right. So I'm a Rava. Mikre Yenuka, Shatala Tabacha Ve'umana, V'Safar Mata, Kulan Kimutrim Va'omdim Ninhu. Now this we learned at the end of Bava Metzia, fascinating line. Teachers, people who plant, the butchers who slaughter the animals, the bloodletters, the Safar Mata, which again we had a debate what this is, either the scribes or the perhaps even the hair cutters. Kulan Kimutrim Va'omdim Ninhu. All these people are forewarned from the beginning. You don't need to be warned. If you cause damage, you're damaged, right? We're going to see right now. Klala Demilta, the rule is Kopseda de lo hadar mutra va'omedhu. Any hefsed you cause someone, any loss you cause to someone else, can't be fixed in these cases. Okay, now we're going to have to go through each one and remember why they can't be fixed. And therefore, it's as if you're already forewarned. Because if you do a mistake, it will be done forever. Now we're going to have to deal with the first one. Mikra Yenuka is a teacher. Now, what did Rava say? If you teach them wrong, it will be fixed, right? They'll figure it out eventually. So Tosfot asked this question, and Rava said, right? Rashi actually quotes Rav Dimi on this and says, once you make the mistake, it's stuck. But the Reese says, what are you talking about? If you look in the Mikra Dardike, a few lines in, Kasha Larid, Harabba Gufeam, Itle Lael, Deshabesh Mime that mistakes get fixed. So Omer the Reed must have a different explanation. It says, it's a mistake that you can't go back on, and this I'm going to have to take very seriously. If you teach them a mistake, you're wasting time on teaching something wrong, and you're wasting their time, and they can never get their time back. You can never get that time back. So anytime I teach you something wrong and then I have to fix it, I've wasted your time. Okay, that's what it's basically saying. That's why I can't go back. So there's two different explanations given here. This one fits much better with the fact that Rava said this, and Rava said before that a mistake can be fixed. So it's hard to explain it that a mistake will never be fixed because Rava doesn't hold that way, unless he was convinced by Rav Dimi to change his mind. A planter, what's the problem? Well, there's a season to plant. If you mess up the planting, then you've lost the whole season. Tabach, a butcher, if I bring the butcher meat and they slaughter it incorrectly, my meat is gone. Now, they can compensate me financially, but if I had guests that day, now I'm stuck without meat for my guests, and that's humiliating. A bloodletter can cause health issues to someone, right, which can sometimes be irreversible. Safar mata, again, depending on how you explain it. If you, let's just go with the simple scribe, right, then the scribe can make a mistake in a document and cause a financial loss to someone. If you say it's a hair cutter, right, then we talked about how haircuts can majorly embarrass someone. You have to walk around with looking terrible. I was just at a funeral two days ago for Charlotte Perlin, and they had a great line about her. They said that one of the grandchildren got up and said, my grandmother used to say, the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut is 2 weeks, and that's it, right? And keep it in perspective. This is saying almost the opposite, although those 2 weeks are pretty miserable. And she was trying to say, keep it in perspective, but this is saying that's pretty serious, because you have to walk around for 2 weeks with this terrible haircut, and it's embarrassing. Okay, so that's the end of that section. Now we're going to move on. And now they're actually going to switch into a different sugya entirely, which really doesn't belong in Bava Batra. It's more of a sugya in Bava Metzia, and they will quote that we had this in Bava Metzia about competition within the same chatzir. Before we were talking about someone opening a store and messing up someone's business. Now we're going to talk about, creating, lack of privacy issues, noise, all that. Now we're going to go into the issue more of competition. So, I'm a Rav Huna. Hi, Bar Mevoah. If you live now, here we're already moving out of the chatzir, the courtyard, into the alley. So the alleyway, remember, we have a few houses open up to a courtyard, and then a few courtyards open up into an alleyway. So we're already talking about a bunch more people here. Not too many, though. If you live in a mavoy and you have rechaya, and you have a millstone, and you basically grind people's grains and charge them for it, va'ata bar mevoah chavre, and another person comes who lives in the same mavoy, v'kamoke gabe, and they put up their own millstone there, dinahu dema'akev ilave. Okay, here's laws of competition. You're not allowed to open in the same alley, the same kind of store or operation, and I can stop you from doing that. Because I could say, you've taken away my business. Why don't we suggest that this source proves Rav Huna? If you're catching fish in a net, you're doing it you're not just regular going fishing, but you're doing it for your business. You're catching fish in a net over here. I have to distance myself as far as the fish go. Okay? Well, how far is that? I have to go a whole parasang of distance separate from you so that I don't catch the fish that you were planning to catch. So it sounds like the same thing because here, right, it's all just preventing future business. So I'm preventing you from getting fish. I'm preventing you from getting, or you were preventing me, whatever it is, right? So one's preventing the other from the future fish, it's all potential, right? It's not actual. Fish aren't in your net yet, and I'm not taking them from you. The fish are hefker, just like people on the street, they can decide to go wherever they decide to go. It's a free market. So right now we think that this supports, but the Gemara is going to say, no, this really is different. Shani dagim diyave siara. Now there's a big debate about what exactly this means, but we'll go with the fact that it's not really hefker, the fish. Because first of all, you could say the fish don't really have free choice. They see food, they go for it. If you come in to get your grains grinded, you can choose me or you can choose the other person. In other words, everyone has free choice. It's not like I'm definitely you're stealing people from me or not. Like people can decide where they want to go. It's not like they were mine anyway. They always have free choice where they can go. As opposed to the fish, we kind of say they don't really have free choice. That's one way of looking at it. Anyway, or it's so obvious you're going to catch those fish because they're going to see food and they're going to eat that it's as if they're already yours. And then it's more like stealing. Whereas whether someone's going to go into this store or that store, they weren't mine at all before, like the fish were. So now we're going to say maybe Rav Huna holds like Rabbi Yehuda in the following Mishna. And this is a Mishna we saw in Bava Metzia. Ditnan Rabbi Yehuda Omer, lo yechalek chemvani klayot ve'egozim letinokot, mipnei shemargilan etzlo. If there's two stores, I can't start giving out sweets to get more people to come to my store, okay? Or klayot and egozim, right? Roasted nuts and stuff. The chachamim mitirim. Chachamim say, of course you can. It's a free market, right? No problem. So it sounds like Rav Huna holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who's very strict about these laws and says, we have to be fair in competition. You can't make a big advantage for people to come to you, right? It's a little different, but it's the same idea as you can't open another store. But the Gemara says, no, afilu tema rabbanan ad kan lo pligei rabbanan ale de Rabbi Yehuda hatam ele de amarle. Anakam miflagei amguze ad plug shiuski. Remember, we saw this, right? The rabbis say the reason why you're allowed to do that is because there's two stores here. I own one, you own one. I can give out what I want because you can choose something else to try to attract people. Everyone's allowed to try to attract people. And that's because we each already had our store here. But but if I'm the only store in town and then you put your store up, that's a whole different story. You're really stealing my business. Now we're going to bring a difficulty with Rav Huna. So Rav Huna seems to say, right, you can't prevent me from making a living by opening, a hummus store right across the store from my hummus store. So Meitive. Here comes a braita to contradict. Actually, this braita says you could do whatever you want. Right, you can see the debates going on. Right, same debates as today. Do we leave it free trade? Do we, have limitations? Is it fair for anyone to open a store or not? Right, there's all these cases where somebody opens a pizza store and then they bring them to a beit din, and how could you do this? Tried by Jewish law to say, this is not fair. So this says you can totally open a store next to a store, a bathhouse next to the bathhouse. They can't stop you. Why? Just like the rabbi said in the issue of the candy. This, by the way, sounds a lot like Rabbi Yossi in the whole thing of I can put my tree wherever I want. It's my property. I can do whatever I want my property. It's a free world. I don't have to worry about what it's going to do to you. To which the Gemara answers, how does Rav Huna go against this Tanaitic source? Tanaihi. It's a debate, a Tanaitic debate. Tanya, as it says in a Braita. Kofim b'nei mevo'od zetzeh, shelo lo shi b'nehem lo chayat, lo borski, lo melamed tinokot, v'lo achami b'nei ba'alei umaniyot. So here it says, you can force people in the mavoi, each, right? people from a different mavoi, let's say you live in the next door alleyway and you want to put up a store in my alleyway, I can say no, no, no. But if you live in this mavoi, you can do what you want in the alley also because you live here. Rashbag thinks even your own neighbor you can force not to do it. So here you have Machloka Tanaim. Rashbag says no, and Tanakama says you can. Amar Rav Huna B'Rei Rabbi Yehoshua. Pshitali barmata achrite matzimake. It's obvious to me that if someone from another city wants to put up a store, the same kind of store that I have in my mavoi, of course he can't, or she can't. They're living in a different area. They have no rights to come into my city. But Ishayach Bakar Klaga, but if they pay the taxes of the city, Dahachav, my city, lo matzimake. If they pay taxes in my city, then I can't stop them. They have free rights to do what they want in my alleyway, as long as they pay taxes in my city. Bar mivoah denafshe, lo matzimake. If we both live in the same alleyway, I can't stop you from creating a store there, even if I have my own store. By Rav Huna B'Rei Rabbi Yehoshua, but those things were obvious to him. But now he asked the following question: Bar mivoah chrine mai. What if someone from a different alleyway wants to come into my alleyway and put up a store? Can I stop them? So with that, we say teku. We're not sure what the answer is. And now we're going to leave Rav Yosef. He's going to say something different about the Mikrei Dardike, and we're going to get about the teacher, that you can actually have competition with teachers, and we'll get to that in tomorrow's daf. So what did we do today? A fascinating daf, Bava Batra Kaf Aleph. Remember that? This is the daf all about chinuch, okay? All about all sorts of educational issues that come up because of the way Rava understood the Mishna. The Mishna, when it said the noise of tinokot is allowed, said it's because people are allowed to make schools in their houses, and that's because of the importance of education. And then we talked about all sorts of issues. How big can the class be? How do you choose, can you fire a teacher for another better teacher? What makes a better teacher? And all sorts of issues there. And then we got into competition laws. Can you open a store? We saw that there was a Tanaitic debate and an Amoraitic debate. And likewise, nowadays, there's debates about this topic always. Basically, is a topic, an issue that spans generations of free competition or not. Are you allowed to infringe on someone's sustenance by creating another store? Okay, and we did see Kenat Sofrim Tareh Chochma, and we're going to get back to that when it comes to education, perhaps things were different. With that, we'll end for today. Wishing everyone a good day.